A story of two powerful friends who, after defeating a common enemy, slowly turned into quiet enemies themselves. They didn't shoot at each other directly, but their fight pulled in the whole world. A fight of ideas, fear, and control. This is the story of the Cold War. The year is 1945. World War II ends. Cities lie in ruins. Millions are dead. But from the destruction, two giants rise stronger than ever: the United States and the Soviet Union. They were allies during the war, fighting against Nazi Germany. But their friendship was never truly warm. It was a bond of convenience, not trust. The United States stood for democracy, free elections, and capitalism. The Soviet Union believed in communism, state control, and one-party rule. These two powers had very different ideas of how the world should be rebuilt. As the war ended, many countries looked to both the US and the USSR for help. But each superpower had its own vision for the future, and soon they began to clash. In February 1945, even before the war had ended, the leaders of the Allies met in Yalta. Franklin D. Roosevelt from the US, Winston Churchill from the UK, and Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union. They agreed on some things, splitting Germany into zones, holding war crime trials, and allowing free elections in Eastern Europe. But after the meeting, Stalin's troops remained in the countries they had liberated. Instead of free elections, Soviet-style governments were set up. A few months later, at Potsdam in July 1945, things got worse. Roosevelt was dead. Churchill was replaced. Truman now represented the US, and he distrusted Stalin deeply. At this meeting, Truman hinted to Stalin about a new weapon the US had developed, the atomic bomb. Stalin already knew. His spies had told him. But he said nothing. Just weeks later, the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Over 100,000 people killed. The world had changed forever. As the smoke cleared, Stalin moved quickly. One by one, Eastern European countries fell under Soviet control. Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany. Free elections were promised, but never held. In 1946, Churchill gave a famous speech in the US. He said, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent." Behind that curtain, people lived under strict control. Western leaders grew nervous. The war was over, but peace was far away. In 1947, the US made its move. Communists were trying to take over Greece and Turkey. President Truman asked Congress for money to help stop them. He said the US must support free people everywhere who were resisting communist pressure. This became known as the Truman Doctrine. Next came the Marshall Plan. Europe was in ruins, so the US offered billions of dollars to help rebuild. The catch? Countries had to stay democratic and open to trade. Most of Western Europe accepted. They rebuilt quickly. The Soviet Union saw this as a trap, a way for America to control Europe. Stalin refused the aid and made his allies say no too. The world was being divided, not by borders, but by beliefs. Germany had been split after the war. The US, Britain, and France controlled the West. The Soviets controlled the East. But Berlin, the capital, sat inside Soviet territory. It too was divided. In 1948, the Western Allies wanted to unite their parts of Germany and help it recover. Stalin didn't like that. So he blocked all roads, railways, and canals going into West Berlin. No food, no fuel, nothing in or out. The West had a choice, fight or fly. They chose to fly. Planes began landing in West Berlin every few minutes, day and night, for nearly a year. This was the Berlin airlift. Over 2 million tons of supplies were flown in. Stalin finally gave up. It was a major win for the West, and proof that the Cold War would be fought with brains, not just bombs. In 1949, the West made it official. They formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance. An attack on one would be an attack on all. In response, the Soviet Union created the Warsaw Pact in 1955 with its own allies. Now, Europe wasn't just divided, it was armed, and everyone was choosing sides. The Cold War had built its battlefield. Meanwhile, across the globe, the Cold War turned deadly. Korea had been split after World War II, North and South. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviets and China, invaded the South. The US and United Nations sent troops to help South Korea. At first, the North pushed far south. But US General Douglas MacArthur led a surprise landing at Incheon and turned the tide. Soon, the fighting moved into North Korea. China entered the war with hundreds of thousands of troops. The battle seesawed back and forth. By 1953, after 3 years of brutal war, millions of deaths, and no clear winner, a ceasefire was signed. Korea remained divided, but the message was clear. The Cold War could explode into real war at any moment. Back home, fear grew. In the US, people worried about communist spies. Government workers were investigated. Hollywood actors were blacklisted. Senator Joseph McCarthy led a hunt for un-American citizens. Many lives were ruined. In the Soviet Union, leaders crushed any sign of protest. People were arrested, spied on, or silenced. At the same time, both sides built more nuclear weapons. The idea was called mutually assured destruction. If one side launched, the other would too. Nobody would survive. So, nobody dared, but the fear never left. Then came a shock from the South. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the government of Cuba. He soon became close with the Soviet Union. In 1961, the U.S. tried to remove him. The Bay of Pigs invasion sent exiles to attack Castro's forces. It failed badly. Then, in 1962, the world held its breath. U.S. spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being placed in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. President Kennedy demanded their removal. For 13 days, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. Ships moved, missiles were armed, but in the end, a deal was made. The Soviets removed the missiles. The U.S. promised not to invade Cuba. The world sighed in relief, but peace didn't last. In Southeast Asia, a new front was opening. Vietnam, once a French colony, was now divided. The North was communist, the South was not. The U.S. began sending money, weapons, and military advisors to help the South. It seemed like a small step, but it was the start of a long, painful war, a war that would test the limits of American power and change the Cold War forever. So, from 1945 to 1965, the Cold War went from whispers in back rooms to battles in Asia. It split the world into two camps. It brought fear to every home. And it reminded everyone that peace could break at any moment. But this was just the beginning. If you want to know what happened next, type Evergo in the comments. We'll be watching. Until then, stay curious.